As you probably know by now, Canada is set to begin selling recreational weed in October of 2018. So that must mean that Canada is about to become like a stoner's paradise, right? Not exactly. In fact, there are a slew of new regulations associated with the recreational marijuana market in Canada that actually make things even more strict than they were before. Let's dive into some of them. First, on Prince Edward Island, Manitoba, Ontario, and British Columbia, smoking weed on your boat is going to be totally illegal. I mean, assuming that you buy into studies that suggest that smoking while driving is detrimental and can slow your reaction time and stuff like that, which has been highly contested. But in any event, if you believe that, it makes sense, I guess, for the driver of the boat to not be able to get stoned. But what about all the other people? Like, it doesn't really make sense if you have a fucking yacht or something and you have hundreds of people on it and none of them can get stoned just because the captain can't get stoned. It's a kind of a dumb law. And so in those provinces, there's actually going to be huge fines, like upwards of $5,000 for breaking that rule. Next, they are implementing a handful of laws associated with home grows, like growing your own marijuana. For instance, in Manitoba and Quebec, you're not going to be able to grow your own weed at all, which is kind of forces you to buy into this particular system. It's kind of like you can grow your own tomatoes, you can grow your own onions. Why couldn't you grow your own weed, And that is going to be punishable by a fine between $250 and over $2,500. Similarly, there's a couple of provinces, I think British Columbia being one of them. In fact, it might be the only one. I'm not totally sure. They're going to let you grow your own weed at home, but it cannot be visible to the public at all. You have to keep it super under lockdown. Can't be seen through a window. Definitely not outside where somebody can see it. So that also is going to be punishable. The fine is actually a little bit more severe. It's going to be 5,000 Canadian dollars and a maximum of 3 months in jail for first-time offenders. It's going to double for repeat offenders. So definitely something to think about if you do live in Canada, if you live in British Columbia in particular, and you are thinking about growing your own weed. So next, the province of Nova Scotia is making it so that any dispensary, recreational dispensary, has to be operating inside of a liquor store. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a personal background of myself and my relationship with weed and alcohol. I'm not much of a drinker, but the only time I ever smoked weed and drank at the same time, I drank Mai Tais at a Chinese restaurant on my friend's birthday and then smoked some weed. I don't ever fucking vomit, and I puked literally all over my friend's house. His wife was pissed. I don't really see selling weed inside of a liquor store as necessarily a good idea. You're kind of like conflating these two things in such a way that each one of them is going to be more dangerous than they would be on their own by being used in conjunction with one another. And so to me, that law kind of seems like it's just going to, make things more dangerous, if anything. Finally, and this has to be the dumbest fucking law I'm going to talk about in this video, Quebec is banning the sale of anything at all with a pot leaf on it. I mean, forget the fact that a pot leaf looks very similar to a Canadian maple, which is directly on the Canadian flag, and it might be difficult to necessarily distinguish those two apart should somebody, screen print something with a pot leaf or a Canadian maple leaf on it. This is just completely antithetical to free speech, and it just seems, kind of arbitrary to me. Like if you have a T-shirt with a pot leaf on it, you can't get high from that. The people who know what the pot leaf are going to be like, oh, look at that pot leaf on the guy's shirt, but it's not going to like affect anybody in any negative way or anything like that. And what's really crazy is the fine associated with it. It's between $2,500 and like $125,000 for this, if you make merchandise that has a picture of a pot leaf on it. I know the free speech laws in Canada are much more strict and like, free speech doesn't necessarily exist the way it does here in the United States. But to me, this seems like a step too far. It's like, It's almost like hysterical in a way, kind of very reefer madness, if you ask me. So, what do you guys think about these new Canadian cannabis laws? I mean, again, Anheuser-Busch, Coors Molson, Coca-Cola, all kinds of companies seem to be jumping in on the bandwagon for recreational weed in Canada. So I do think you're going to see potentially a relaxation of some of these laws, hopefully the one with the pot leaf in particular in Quebec. But I don't know, man. It just seems like, they vow to like legalize something and they actually make the laws pretty strict. So it's your hands are tied either way, I suppose. Let me know what you think. Later. Oh, and I guess before I go, for all you Quebecois out there, I know that in Canada it's pronounced Quebec. In America we pronounce it Quebec. So whatever. Bye.